The sun had already begun its descent toward the dusty horizon when Beatrice Whitmore noticed the stranger watching her from across the mercantile, and something in his steady gaze made her heart do something it had not done in the 6 years since her husband had died. It was autumn 1878 in Nevada City, California, and the afternoon light filtered through the shop windows in golden streams that caught the dust motes dancing in the air. She was 42 years old, and she had long ago accepted that her time for such foolishness had passed. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you listening?" Clara Henderson's sharp voice cut through her momentary distraction. The younger woman stood beside her, arms crossed over her ample bosom, her expression one of barely concealed disapproval. "I was saying that my nephew is looking for property in town. Fine young man, good prospects. Not that I imagine you would be interested in such things anymore." Beatrice pulled her attention back to Clara, though she could still feel the weight of those eyes on her. "I am quite content with my situation, Clara. The boarding house keeps me occupied enough." "That is precisely what I mean." Clara leaned in closer, her voice dropping to what she likely considered a confidential whisper, though it carried clearly through the small shop. "You are still a relatively young woman, Beatrice, but you must face facts. No man wants to take on a woman of your age, especially one with responsibilities. You had your chance at love. Now you must accept your lot and stop entertaining any notions otherwise." The words struck deeper than Beatrice cared to admit, not because they were cruel, but because they echoed thoughts she had whispered to herself in the dark hours of countless sleepless nights. She straightened her shoulders and picked up her basket. "Thank you for your concern, Clara, but I really must be going. I have guests arriving this evening." She turned toward the door, determined to leave with what remained of her dignity, and found herself nearly colliding with a broad chest covered in a worn leather vest. Strong hands steadied her by the elbows, and she looked up into a face that was weathered by sun and wind but remarkably handsome. The man who had been watching her now stood close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "Did not mean to startle you." "You did not," Beatrice said quickly, too quickly, and felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is, I should have been watching where I was going." He released her arms but did not step back immediately. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I am Wade Fletcher. Just arrived in town this morning, and I find myself in need of lodging. Heard tell there is a boarding house run by a widow woman. Would not happen to know where I might find it." "I run the boarding house," Beatrice said, acutely aware that Clara was watching this exchange with avid interest. "It is on Cedar Street, the white house with blue shutters. I have one room available." "Then I expect I will be seeing more of you, Mrs. Whitmore." Wade tipped his hat, and there was something in the way he said her name that made her pulse quicken. "I will bring my things by this evening if that suits." "That will be fine. Supper is at 6. She hurried past him and out into the street, her heart hammering in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Behind her, she could hear Clara already beginning what would no doubt become a lengthy commentary on the impropriety of the entire encounter. The walk back to her boarding house took only 10 minutes, but it gave Beatrice time to collect herself. What was she thinking, reacting like a schoolgirl to a stranger's smile? Clara was right, even if her delivery had been tactless. Beatrice was 42 years old, a widow with a business to run and a reputation to maintain. She had loved Thomas Whitmore with all her heart, and when the fever had taken him 6 years ago, she had buried that part of herself along with him, or so she had thought. The boarding house was indeed white with blue shutters, a 2-story structure that Thomas had built with his own hands 15 years ago. Beatrice had converted it into a boarding house out of necessity after his death, needing some way to support herself. She took pride in keeping it immaculate, with lace curtains in every window and flower boxes that bloomed even this late in the season. Her current guests were a mix of the usual types who passed through Nevada City. There was Mr. Harrison, an older gentleman who had been living there for nearly 3 years, working as a clerk at the assay office. The Simmons family occupied 2 rooms, a young couple with their infant daughter, saving money to buy their own property. And there was Miss Peters, a schoolteacher who kept to herself and spent most of her time reading. Beatrice went immediately to the kitchen to begin preparations for supper. Cooking had always soothed her, the familiar routines of chopping vegetables and seasoning meat allowing her mind to wander. She could not stop thinking about Wade Fletcher, about the way he had looked at her as though she were worth looking at. When was the last time a man had looked at her that way? Thomas, certainly, but he had been her husband. This was different. This was a stranger seeing her not as the respectable widow Whitmore, not as the woman who ran the boarding house, but as simply Beatrice. She was in the midst of rolling out biscuit dough when she heard the knock at the front door. Wiping her hands on her apron, she made her way through the house, expecting perhaps a delivery or one of the neighbors. Instead, she found Wade Fletcher on her porch, a worn leather bag slung over his shoulder and his hat in his hands. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, stepping back to allow him entry. "You are early. I was not expecting you until closer to supper." "Apologies, madam. The hotel clerk said I should come on by. If it is inconvenient, I can wait outside." "No, of course not. Please come in." She led him through the parlor, conscious of his gaze taking in the details of her home. She had done her best to make it welcoming, with comfortable furniture and paintings on the walls, small touches that transformed it from merely a place to sleep into something resembling a home. "The available room is upstairs, second door on the left. It has a good view of the street and catches the morning light." Wade followed her up the narrow staircase, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. The room she showed him was modest but clean, with an iron-framed bed covered in a quilt she had stitched herself, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. "This will do just fine," Wade said, setting his bag down. "More than fine, actually. You keep a nice place, Mrs. Whitmore. Thank you. I do my best." She clasped her hands in front of her, suddenly uncertain. There was something about being alone with him in the small room that felt intimate, improper. "Supper is at 6, as I mentioned. Breakfast is at 7. I ask that guests be respectful of quiet hours after 9 in the evening, as some of my residents rise early for work." "Understood." He was looking at her again with that same intent expression from the mercantile. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you do not think me forward, but I have to say that I am grateful my search for lodging brought me here. I have a feeling I am going to enjoy my stay in Nevada City." There was no mistaking his meaning, and Beatrice felt that traitorous blush creeping up her neck again. "I should get back to the kitchen. Please make yourself comfortable." She fled before he could respond, practically running down the stairs in her haste to escape. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not some blushing maiden. Yet Wade Fletcher had managed to unsettle her completely in the span of a few hours. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity as she finished preparing the meal. Roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh biscuits, and apple pie for dessert. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, the dining room table was set and the other guests were gathering. Wade was the last to arrive, having changed into a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He took the empty seat directly across from Beatrice, and she found it difficult to concentrate on the usual dinner conversation. Mr. Harrison was discussing some dispute at the assay office, while Mrs. Simmons fussed over her baby. Miss Peters ate quietly, occasionally contributing a brief comment. "Mr. Fletcher," Mr. Harrison said eventually, turning his attention to the newcomer. "What brings you to Nevada City?" "Work primarily," Wade replied, accepting the bowl of potatoes Beatrice passed to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt the contact like a spark of electricity. "I am a horse breeder by trade. Heard there was good land available in this area, thought I might establish myself here." "A horse breeder," Mrs. Simmons said with interest. "How fascinating. Do you work with wild horses or domesticated ones?" "Both, actually. I have been working with horses since I was a boy. My father taught me everything he knew, and I have been adding to that knowledge ever since." Wade's gaze drifted to Beatrice as he spoke. "I believe in taking things that others might overlook or undervalue and showing their true worth." The comment seemed directed at her, though the others at the table did not appear to notice. Beatrice focused intently on cutting her chicken, afraid that if she met his eyes, she would give away the tumult of emotions swirling within her. After supper, as was her custom, Beatrice retreated to the kitchen to clean up while her guests retired to the parlor or their rooms. She was elbow-deep in soapy water, scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot when Wade appeared in the doorway. "Can I help?" he asked. "That is not necessary, Mr. Fletcher. You are a paying guest, not hired help. Perhaps I just enjoy your company." He picked up a dish towel and began drying the plates she had already washed. "And please call me Wade. Mr. Fletcher makes me feel like my father." Despite herself, Beatrice smiled. "Very well, Wade, though you really should not be in here. Why not? Because it is improper." He set a dried plate on the stack and reached for another. "Mrs. Whitmore, if I may be frank, I am not much concerned with what others consider proper. I am concerned with what feels right. You have known me for all of a few hours. How can you possibly know what feels right? Sometimes a few hours is all it takes." He paused in his work, turning to face her fully. "I know you probably think I am forward or presumptuous. Maybe I am. But I am also 36 years old, and I have learned not to waste time dancing around things that matter. From the moment I saw you in that mercantile, something in me recognized something in you. Tell me you did not feel it too." Beatrice's hands stilled in the water. "I am too old for such fancies." "Who told you that?" "Everyone," she said softly. "Clara Henderson this afternoon, but she is only the latest. The whole town has made it clear that my time for romance has passed. I am the widow Whitmore, respectable and settled in my ways. That is who I am now." Wade set down the towel and moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "That is who they have told you that you are. But who do you want to be?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Beatrice realized she was trembling, not from fear but from the intensity of suddenly being seen, truly seen for the first time in years. "I do not know," she whispered. "I buried that part of myself when I buried Thomas. Maybe it is time to dig it back up." She turned to face him, her hands dripping soapy water onto the floor. "You do not understand. This town, these people, they have expectations. A woman of my age, in my position, I cannot simply throw caution to the wind. I have a reputation, a business to run." "I am not asking you to throw anything anywhere," Wade said gently. "I am just asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, those people who are so certain about what you can and cannot have might be wrong. Age means nothing when hearts are true, Beatrice. And I believe your heart is very true indeed." The sound of her given name on his lips sent a shiver through her. How long had it been since someone other than family had called her Beatrice? She was always Mrs. Whitmore, always the widow, never just herself. "This is madness," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The best things usually are." Wade smiled, and there was such warmth in his expression that she felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed away and forgotten. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even to make any promises. I am just asking for a chance. Let me get to know you. Let yourself get to know me. See where it leads." Before Beatrice could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly turned back to the dishes, and Wade resumed drying, both of them the picture of innocent propriety as Miss Peters appeared in the doorway with her empty teacup. "Oh, I did not mean to interrupt," the schoolteacher said, though her curious gaze darted between them. "I was just bringing this back." "Thank you, Miss Peters," Beatrice said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "You can leave it on the counter." After Miss Peters had departed, Wade caught Beatrice's eye and they both fought back laughter at the absurdity of acting like guilty children. It was such a simple moment, but it felt significant somehow, as though they were already sharing secrets. "Think about what I said," Wade murmured as he hung up the dish towel. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Wade." She watched him leave the kitchen, and only when she was alone did she allow herself to lean against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. What was she doing? Wade Fletcher was a stranger, a man she knew nothing about, yet he had walked into her life and immediately began challenging every certainty she had built over the past 6 years. That night, lying in her bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Beatrice could not sleep. She kept replaying their conversation, the look in his eyes, the sound of her name on his lips. She thought about Thomas, about the love they had shared, and wondered if it was a betrayal to feel drawn to another man. But surely Thomas would not have wanted her to live out the rest of her days alone, would he? He had always been generous of spirit, always wanted her happiness above all else. The next morning, Beatrice rose early as always and prepared breakfast. Wade was among the first to come down, looking well-rested and devastatingly handsome in the morning light. He greeted her with a smile that made her heart skip, and she found herself smiling back despite her best intentions. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Wade would help her clean up after meals, and they would talk, really talk about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to break horses from his father, about the years he had spent wandering from town to town, never quite finding a place that felt like home. She found herself opening up in return, sharing memories of Thomas, of the early days of their marriage, of the fear and uncertainty that had followed his death. "You loved him very much," Wade observed one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "I did," Beatrice said. "He was a good man, the best I have ever known." "I am glad you had that," Wade said, and there was no jealousy in his tone, only genuine warmth. "Everyone deserves to be loved like that at least once in their life. Have you been in love, I mean?" Wade was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Once. Her name was Margaret. We were young, probably too young to know what we were doing. Her parents did not approve of me, said I had no prospects, no future. They married her off to a banker's son from back east. Last I heard, she was living in Boston with 4 children and a big house." "You still think of her, sometimes," he admitted, "but not the way you might imagine. I think of her as a lesson learned. I wasted so much time trying to be what her parents wanted, trying to prove myself worthy, that I forgot to just be myself. I will not make that mistake again." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "With you, Beatrice, I am just myself. No pretenses, no games, and I hope you feel you can be yourself with me too." "I am beginning to," she said softly. "But Wade, people are starting to talk. Clara Henderson has been by twice this week. ostensibly to borrow sugar but really to ask probing questions about my new boarder. And I have seen the way people look at us when we are in town together. Let them talk. What do their opinions matter? They matter to my business. If people think I am behaving improperly, they might stop sending customers my way. I cannot afford to lose income. Wade reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. It was the first time he had touched her since that moment in the kitchen, and the contact sent warmth flooding through her. Then, we will be beyond reproach in public. But in private, in moments like this, can we not just be two people getting to know each other? Beatrice knew she should pull her hand away, should maintain proper distance, but she could not bring herself to do it. His touch felt too good, too right, like coming home after a long journey. I suppose that would be acceptable. His smile was brilliant. You suppose, do you? Well, I will take that as a yes. They sat there on the porch as darkness fell, hands linked, not speaking, just existing together in a comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. When Beatrice finally went inside, she felt lighter than she had in years, as though Wade's belief in possibilities was somehow contagious. The following week brought the town's autumn festival, an annual event that drew people from miles around. There would be a dance, competitions, food stalls, and general merriment. Beatrice typically helped with the organization but did not participate much herself, content to watch from the sidelines. You should come to the dance, Mrs. Simmons said one morning at breakfast. The young woman had grown increasingly friendly with Beatrice over the weeks. It would do you good to get out and enjoy yourself. I am not much for dancing anymore, Beatrice demurred. Nonsense, Wade interjected from across the table. I am sure you are a fine dancer. In fact, I was hoping you might save me a dance or two at the festival. All conversation stopped. Mr. Harrison looked up from his newspaper. Miss Peters paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, and Mrs. Simmons openly beamed with delight. Beatrice felt every eye on her, waiting for her response. I am not sure that would be appropriate, she said carefully. Why not? Wade's tone was casual, but there was challenge in his eyes. We are both unattached adults. There is nothing inappropriate about a dance between friends. Friends. Is that what they were? It felt both inadequate and too bold a claim, but the way he was looking at her with that slight smile playing at his lips made it clear he was not going to let this drop easily. Very well, Beatrice heard herself say. One dance. Two, Wade countered. 1.5. He laughed, a rich sound that filled the dining room. I will take it. The festival arrived on a Saturday with perfect weather, clear skies and crisp autumn air. Beatrice wore her best dress, a deep green silk that Thomas had bought her years ago and that she rarely had occasion to wear. She told herself she was not dressing up for Wade, but her reflection in the mirror suggested otherwise. She had taken extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a way that softened her features, and had even applied a touch of rose water to her wrists and throat. The festival was in full swing when she arrived, the town square transformed with colorful bunting and lanterns strung between buildings. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air, and a fiddle band was already playing lively tunes. Children ran between the stalls while adults gathered in clusters, talking and laughing. Beatrice had barely taken 2 steps into the square when Clara Henderson materialized at her side, resplendent in an elaborate purple dress that must have cost a small fortune. Beatrice, how lovely you look, Clara said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Quite the effort for someone who claims to be past such vanities. It is a festival, Clara. I thought I should make an effort, indeed. And I suppose your effort has nothing to do with that cowboy staying at your boarding house. Clara's eyes glittered with malicious glee. The whole town is talking about how you have been seen together. Really, Beatrice, at your age, do you not think it is unseemly to be carrying on like a lovesick girl? I am not carrying on, Beatrice said, trying to keep her voice level. Mr. Fletcher is a boarder, nothing more. Of course, dear. Whatever you say. Clara patted her arm in a patronizing gesture. But do take care. Men like that are not interested in women of a certain age for respectable reasons, if you take my meaning. He is probably after your property or your savings. A woman alone is easy prey for a smooth-talking scoundrel. The words hit their mark, giving voice to fears Beatrice had tried not to acknowledge. What if Clara was right? What if Wade's attention was not genuine but calculated? She had some savings put aside, and the boarding house was worth a decent sum. Perhaps she was just a foolish old woman being taken advantage of by a charming younger man. There you are. Wade's voice cut through her spiral of doubt. He appeared at her other side, looking impossibly handsome in a clean white shirt and black vest. I have been looking for you, Mrs. Henderson. Good evening. Clara's smile was tight. Mr. Fletcher, how nice. Well, I must be going. Do think about what I said, Beatrice. After Clara had swept away, Wade turned to Beatrice with a concerned expression. What was that about? You look upset. It is nothing. Just Clara being Clara. It did not look like nothing. He guided her away from the crowd toward a quieter spot near the edge of the square. Tell me what she said. Beatrice hesitated, then the words came tumbling out. She said people are talking about us. That I am making a fool of myself carrying on at my age, and she suggested that you might be after my property or money. Wade's expression darkened. And do you believe her? I do not know what to believe, Beatrice admitted. Wade, I barely know you. For all I know, Clara could be right. Perhaps I am just a lonely widow being taken in by a smooth talker. Look at me. Wade took her shoulders gently, his eyes searching hers. I do not care about your property. I do not care about your money. I care about you, Beatrice, the woman who hums while she cooks. The woman who treats everyone with kindness, even when they do not deserve it. The woman who loved her husband deeply and carries that loss with grace. That is who I see when I look at you. Not your age, not your bank account, just you. How can you be so certain after only a few weeks? Because I have spent my whole life not being certain, drifting from place to place, never finding where I belonged. And then I walked into that mercantile and saw you, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I felt like I had come home. Call it foolishness if you want, but I know what my heart tells me. Beatrice felt tears prickling at her eyes. People will always talk. They will always find reasons why this should not be. Then they can talk, Wade said firmly. I told you before, age means nothing when hearts are true. I believe that, Beatrice. The question is, do you? She looked up at him, at this man who had walked into her life and turned it upside down in the best possible way. She thought about all the reasons she should walk away, all the voices telling her she was too old, too settled, too much the respectable widow to take such risks. And then she thought about how alive she felt when she was with him, how the world seemed brighter and more full of possibility. I want to believe it, she whispered. I am just afraid. Fear is normal, but do not let it stop you from living. He held out his hand. Dance with me, Beatrice, right here, right now. Show everyone that you are not too old for anything. The band was playing a waltz, the music drifting across the square. Beatrice glanced around and saw people watching them, waiting to see what she would do. Clara was there, arms crossed and expression smug, clearly expecting Beatrice to retreat back into her shell of respectability. Beatrice took Wade's hand. He pulled her into a proper waltz position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers aloft, and they began to move. Beatrice had not danced in years, but her feet remembered the steps, following Wade's lead naturally. He was a good dancer, confident and sure, guiding her effortlessly through the patterns. As they turned and swayed to the music, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. There was only Wade, only the warmth of his hand at her waist, only the way he was looking at her as though she were the most beautiful woman in the world. Beatrice felt something inside her shift, some last wall of resistance crumbling. "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Wade's smile was radiant. "Good, because I have already fallen in love with you." When the song ended, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so old-fashioned and gallant that it made her heart swell. Around them, some people were applauding while others whispered behind their hands. Beatrice found she did not care. 1.5 dances, Wade reminded her with a grin. "We have another one coming." They danced twice more, and then they wandered through the festival together, sampling food and watching the competitions. Wade won the shooting contest, displaying a marksmanship that impressed even the old-timers. Beatrice felt a flush of pride watching him, as though she had any right to claim his achievements as her own. As the evening wore on and the lanterns were lit, creating a magical glow over the square, Wade led her to a bench slightly removed from the main crowd. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, brilliant points of light in the vast expanse above. "I have been thinking," Wade said, his arm draped casually along the back of the bench behind her, "about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean with us. I told you I came to Nevada City looking to establish myself, to find land for my horse breeding business. I have been scouting properties this past week, and I think I found the right place. It is about 5 miles outside town, good grazing land with a creek running through it." Beatrice felt her heart sink. 5 miles might as well be 50 when it came to seeing each other regularly. "That sounds perfect for what you need." "It is. But here is the thing, I do not want to build a life there alone." He turned to face her fully. "Beatrice, I know this is fast. I know people will say we are crazy, but I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to court you properly. I want to show this town that you are not too old for love, that we are not too different or too anything. I want to build something real with you. Wade, I cannot just leave my boarding house. It is my livelihood. I am not asking you to. Keep the boarding house, hire someone to help you manage it if needed, or sell it and start fresh, or keep it and we make it work around the distance. I do not have all the answers, Beatrice. I just know that I want you in my life, and I am willing to figure out the details as we go." It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Every practical bone in Beatrice's body screamed that this was too fast, too uncertain, too risky. But the part of her that Wade had awakened, the part that remembered how to feel and hope and dream, that part was singing. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "Not because I do not want this, but because I need to consider the practicalities. I need to know I am not making a decision based purely on emotion." "That is fair." Wade took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." They sat together on that bench until the festival began to wind down, talking about everything and nothing, planning and dreaming. By the time Wade walked her home, Beatrice felt as though she were floating, her feet barely touching the ground. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Wade moved forward with purchasing the land he had found, and Beatrice found herself increasingly involved in his plans. He would come back to the boarding house in the evenings dusty and tired from working on the property, and over dinner, he would tell her about his progress. The other boarders soon caught on to the relationship developing between them, and reactions were mixed. Mrs. Simmons was delighted, constantly finding excuses to push them together. Miss Peters maintained her usual reserved demeanor, but seemed cautiously approving. Mr. Harrison was neutral, more concerned with his own affairs than the romantic entanglements of others. But the town at large was less kind. Clara Henderson made it her personal mission to spread disapproval. She organized a tea specifically to discuss the situation, inviting all the respectable ladies of Nevada City. Beatrice was, pointedly, not invited, but Mrs. Simmons attended and reported back on the proceedings. "It was dreadful," the young woman said, sitting in Beatrice's kitchen the next morning. "Clara held court like some kind of queen, going on and on about how you were setting a bad example for younger women, how it was unseemly for a widow to be courting, especially with a man younger than yourself." "Wade is only 6 years younger," Beatrice protested. "Hardly a scandalous age difference. I know that, and anyone with sense knows that. But Clara has convinced half the town that you are making a fool of yourself. She even suggested that the church should speak to you about propriety." Mrs. Simmons reached across the table and squeezed Beatrice's hand. "Do not let them get to you. What you and Mr. Fletcher have is beautiful. Anyone can see how happy you have been these past weeks." But it was difficult not to let the criticism affect her. Beatrice began noticing the stares when she walked through town, the way conversations would stop when she entered a shop. One afternoon, Reverend Michaels stopped by the boarding house, ostensibly to check on her spiritual well-being but really to express his concern about her association with Wade. "Mrs. Whitmore," the Reverend said, accepting the tea she offered with a grave expression, "I hope you know I come here as a friend, not as a judge. Of course, Reverend. There has been talk, as I am sure you are aware, about your relationship with Mr. Fletcher. Now, I am not one to interfere in personal matters, but as a widow, you hold a certain position in this community. People look to you as an example of dignity and propriety." Beatrice set down her teacup with more force than necessary. "And falling in love somehow violates that dignity." "That is not what I am saying, but you must consider appearances. Mr. Fletcher is younger, he is new to town, and you barely know him. People worry that you are being taken advantage of, or worse, that you are allowing physical passions to override good judgment. With all due respect, Reverend, my relationship with Wade Fletcher is proper in every way. He has been a perfect gentleman, and we have done nothing that could be considered inappropriate." "Perhaps not, but perception matters. If you continue down this path, you may find yourself ostracized by the very community you have been a part of for so many years." The Reverend leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I only ask that you consider whether this man is worth losing everything you have built here." After he left, Beatrice sat alone in her parlor, her mind churning. Was Wade worth it? Was any man worth risking her standing in the community, her business, the life she had carefully constructed? But even as she asked herself these questions, she knew the answer. Wade had brought light back into her life. He had reminded her that she was more than just the widow Whitmore, more than just a woman past her prime. With him, she was simply Beatrice, and she was worthy of love and happiness. That evening, when Wade returned from working on his land, she was waiting for him on the porch. He looked exhausted, his shirt stained with sweat and dirt, but his face lit up when he saw her. "Good evening," he said, climbing the porch steps. "You look like a woman with something on her mind." "Reverend Michaels came by today. He wanted to talk about us." Wade's expression darkened. "Let me guess. He thinks you should end things with me for the sake of your reputation." "Something like that." Beatrice stood and moved to the porch railing, looking out at the street. "Wade, this is getting harder. The whole town is against us. People I have known for years are treating me like I have committed some terrible sin. I knew there would be talk, but I did not realize it would be this bad." She heard him move up behind her, felt the warmth of his presence at her back. "Do you want to end things?" "No," she said immediately. then turned to face him. "No, I do not want that at all, but I also do not know how to move forward when it feels like the whole world is trying to tear us apart." Wade reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gently wiping away tears she had not realized were falling. "Then we do not let them. Beatrice, I love you. I have loved you from that first moment in the mercantile when you looked up at me with those beautiful eyes. I love your strength, your kindness, your courage, and if the people of this town cannot see how remarkable you are, then that is their loss, not ours. But this is my home. These are my neighbors, my friends. Are they really your friends if they abandon you for choosing happiness? If they think you should spend the rest of your life alone because it makes them more comfortable?" He shook his head. "Real friends, people who truly care about you, they would want you to be happy. The rest are just people afraid of anyone who dares to step outside the narrow little boxes they have built for themselves." "When did you become so wise?" Beatrice asked, managing a watery smile. "I have had a good teacher. You are one of the bravest people I know, Beatrice. You lost your husband, you rebuilt your life, you made something out of nothing with this boarding house. And now you are brave enough to love again despite what anyone says. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done." Standing there on the porch with Wade's hands framing her face and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Beatrice made her decision. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was their first kiss, and it was everything a first kiss should be. Tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Wade's arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only this, only the two of them, only the love that had grown between them despite all the obstacles. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean what I think it means? It means I am done letting other people dictate my happiness. It means I love you, Wade Fletcher, and I do not care who knows it. It means I am ready to start planning our future together, whatever that looks like." His smile was brilliant. "In that case, I have a question to ask you. Beatrice Whitmore, will you marry me?" The proposal was not a surprise, not really, but hearing the actual words still took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Wade let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire set in it. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. "The only thing of value I own, and I have been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." The ring fit perfectly, and Beatrice stared at it through tears of happiness. "It is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you." They went inside together, hand in hand, and announced their engagement to the other boarders. Mrs. Simmons squealed with delight and immediately began planning a celebration. Miss Peters offered her quiet congratulations. Even Mr. Harrison looked pleased, raising his evening glass of whiskey in a toast to the happy couple. "You have made me very happy, Mrs. Whitmore," Wade said later that night as they sat together in the parlor after the others had retired. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Beatrice," she corrected. "If we are to be married, you should call me Beatrice." "Beatrice," he repeated as though savoring the sound of it. "My Beatrice." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, despite Reverend Michaels's obvious reservations. Mrs. Simmons served as Beatrice's witness, while Wade asked Mr. Harrison to stand up with him, the older man having grown fond of the younger during their time living in the same house. The church was not full. In fact, it was more empty than not. Clara Henderson and her circle of disapproving friends made a pointed absence, as did many others in town. But those who did come, those who chose to celebrate with them despite the social pressure. Their presence meant all the more for being freely given. Beatrice wore a dress of pale blue silk, simple but elegant, with her hair arranged in soft curls. Wade looked handsome in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her as she walked down the aisle. There was no one to give her away, but she did not need anyone. She was walking toward her future of her own free will, making her own choices. The ceremony itself was brief. Reverend Michaels performed his duty with professional distance, but his disapproval was evident in every word. Beatrice barely heard the service, too focused on Wade's steady presence beside her, on the way his hand felt holding hers, on the promise in his eyes. When the Reverend finally pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. The small group of well-wishers applauded, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Beatrice felt completely, perfectly happy. They held a small reception at the boarding house, with Mrs. Simmons having prepared a lovely meal and even managed to bake a wedding cake. It was nothing fancy, but it was filled with warmth and genuine affection, which made it perfect. To the bride and groom, Mr. Harrison toasted, raising his glass. "May your love prove all the doubters wrong." "Hear, hear," chorused the others. As the afternoon faded into evening, Beatrice and Wade slipped away to begin their wedding night. Beatrice had arranged for Mrs. Simmons to manage the boarding house for the next few days while they took a brief honeymoon, though they were not going far. Wade had been working to make his property livable, and he wanted to show her what would soon be their home. The ride out to the property took about an hour in Wade's wagon. The land was beautiful, rolling hills covered in grass that was still green despite the lateness of the season. The creek Wade had mentioned ran through the center of the property, its water clear and cool. He had built a small cabin, just one room for now, but well-made and sturdy. "It is not much yet," Wade said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but I wanted us to have a place of our own. We can expand as needed." Beatrice looked around at the vast expanse of land, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the endless sky overhead. "It is perfect." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. Wade had clearly made an effort, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the small table. A fire was already laid in the stone fireplace, ready to be lit. "Mrs. Fletcher," Wade said, pulling her into his arms. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Beatrice admitted, resting her head against his chest. "Wade, I know this is not how I expected my life to go. After Thomas died, I thought that chapter was closed forever. I never imagined I would feel this way again." "Are you happy?" Deliriously so. Also terrified. "What if people continue to shun us? What if the boarding house suffers? What if we cannot make this work?" Wade tipped her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "Then we will figure it out together. That is what marriage is, Beatrice. It is facing the challenges together, supporting each other, choosing each other every day even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope and fear into that kiss. Wade responded in kind, and soon they were moving toward the bed, helping each other out of the layers of clothing that separated them. There was nothing rushed or uncertain about it. They were both adults, both experienced, and they knew what they wanted. Making love with Wade was different from anything Beatrice had known with Thomas. Not better or worse, just different as Wade himself was different. There was passion, yes, but also tenderness and playfulness, and a deep sense of connection that went beyond the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Beatrice traced the scars on Wade's chest, remnants of a life spent working with horses and living rough. "Tell me we made the right choice," she murmured. "We made the only choice we could." We chose love, Beatrice. We chose each other. Everything else will fall into place. She wanted to believe him, and lying there in his arms, safe and warm and loved, it was easy to do so. They spent 3 blissful days at the cabin, existing in their own little world where the opinions of others could not reach them. Wade showed her around the property, pointing out where he planned to build corrals and a larger barn. He talked about the horses he wanted to breed, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. Beatrice found herself caught up in his vision, imagining the life they would build together. On their last evening before returning to town, they sat outside watching the sunset, Beatrice nestled between Wade's legs with his arms wrapped around her. "I have been thinking," Wade said, "about the boarding house. I know you do not want to give it up, and I respect that. But managing it while also helping me here is going to be difficult. What if we hired someone to run it for you? You would still own it, still profit from it, but you would not have to do all the daily work." "Who would I hire? Most people in town will not even speak to me now." Mrs. Simmons mentioned that her husband has found property to buy. They will be moving out soon anyway. What if we offer the position to someone from outside Nevada City? Someone who would not care about the town gossip and would just appreciate the opportunity. It was not a bad idea. The boarding house was profitable, and with the right management, it could continue to provide income without consuming all her time. "I will think about it. That is all I ask." Wade kissed the top of her head. "Whatever you decide, I support you. I meant what I said, Beatrice. I am not asking you to give up who you are or what you have built. I just want us to build something new together as well." When they returned to town, reality came crashing back quickly. Beatrice found a letter waiting for her from the Ladies' Aid Society, informing her that her membership had been suspended indefinitely due to conduct unbecoming Clara Henderson's handiwork, no doubt. There was also a note from Reverend Michaels expressing his disappointment in her choices. But there were bright spots too. Mrs. Simmons had indeed received notice that the property her husband wanted had become available, and they would be moving within the month. She enthusiastically endorsed Wade's idea of hiring outside help for the boarding house. Miss Peters, who Beatrice had always considered rather cold, surprised her by expressing genuine happiness at seeing her married. "You deserve joy, Mrs. Fletcher," the schoolteacher said quietly one evening. "I was married once, you know. My husband died young, and I let others convince me that my life was over at 25. I spent the next 20 years living half a life. Do not make the same mistake I did." The revelation that Miss Peters had been young once, had loved and lost and given up, touched Beatrice deeply. She squeezed the other woman's hand in understanding, and for the first time, a real friendship began to form between them. Wade divided his time between working on the ranch and helping Beatrice with the boarding house. True to his word, he made inquiries about potential managers, and eventually found a capable widow from Sacramento named Mrs. Dorothy Green, who was looking for a fresh start after her own husband's death. She was closer to Beatrice's age, practical and efficient, and she did not give a fig about small-town gossip. "I ran a hotel in Sacramento for 10 years, Mrs. Green said during her interview. "I know how to manage guests and keep a house running smoothly, and frankly, Mrs. Fletcher, I find it refreshing to work for someone who had the courage to choose happiness over propriety. Too many of us forget that life is meant to be lived." Beatrice hired her on the spot, with Mrs. Green managing the day-to-day operations of the boarding house. Beatrice found herself with time to help Wade build their ranch. She learned about horses, about breaking and training them, about bloodlines and breeding. Wade was a patient teacher, never condescending, always encouraging. Together, they worked to build not just a business but a true partnership. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with heavy snows that kept them largely isolated at the ranch. But Beatrice found she did not mind. The cabin was cozy, and being snowed in with Wade felt more like a gift than a hardship. They talked for hours, made love by firelight, and planned their future. In the spring, Wade bought his first breeding stock, 3 mares and a stallion of excellent quality. Beatrice watched him work with the animals, his hands gentle but firm, his voice soothing. She understood why he was so good at what he did. He had patience and empathy, qualities that worked as well with horses as with people. That spring also brought a thaw in the town's attitude toward them, though it was slow and grudging. Some people, seeing that the marriage was solid and that Beatrice seemed genuinely happy, began to soften their stance. Others, like Clara Henderson, remained implacably opposed, but their influence waned as more and more people accepted the Fletchers as a respectable couple. The real change came when Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was 43 years old, had thought herself well past the age of childbearing, so the news came as a complete shock. She sat in the cabin, the reality of it slowly sinking in, unsure whether to be terrified or elated. When she told Wade that evening, he swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. "A baby," he kept repeating, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. I am old for this, Wade. There are risks. Then we will be careful. We will get the best doctor, we will do everything right. But Beatrice, this is a miracle, our miracle." His joy was infectious, and Beatrice found her own worry giving way to excitement. A baby. Another chance at motherhood, something she had never expected to have again. She had given birth to 2 children with Thomas, a son who had died in infancy and a daughter who had succumbed to illness at age 5. The losses had been devastating, and part of her fear now stemmed from those old wounds. But this was a new beginning, a new chance. She refused to let fear rob her of the joy. The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from terrible sickness in the early months and was constantly exhausted. Wade was endlessly patient, taking over most of her usual tasks and fussing over her like a mother hen. Even Mrs. Green, upon hearing the news, began sending extra care packages to the ranch. Nutritious meals and herbal teas meant to ease Beatrice's discomfort. The news of the pregnancy spread through town, and the reaction was mixed. Some saw it as wonderful news, proof that love could indeed bloom at any age. Others, including the ever-judgmental Clara Henderson, saw it as scandalous. At her age, Clara was overheard saying at the Mercantile, "It is practically indecent, and mark my words, no good will come of it." But Clara's voice was increasingly drowned out by those who chose kindness. Women who had kept their distance began stopping by the ranch with baby clothes and advice. Even Reverend Michaels, unbending as ever on most matters, offered a grudging blessing when they met him on the street one day. As Beatrice's belly grew round with child, the ranch flourished. Wade's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and he began getting orders from ranchers across California and even into Nevada. The business was thriving, and with it, their fortunes improved. They used some of the profits to expand the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Wade did most of the work himself, but he hired help for the heavier labor. The result was a home that, while still modest, was comfortable and welcoming. In her 7th month of pregnancy, Beatrice received an unexpected visitor. Clara Henderson arrived at the ranch in her fine carriage, dressed impeccably as always. Beatrice, who had been hanging laundry, was surprised to see her. "Mrs. Henderson," she said warily, "this is unexpected." Clara climbed down from the carriage with the help of her driver and stood for a moment, seeming to struggle with herself. Finally, she spoke. "I came to apologize." Beatrice was certain she had heard wrong. "I beg your pardon, you heard me. I came to apologize." Clara's face was flushed, whether from embarrassment or the heat, Beatrice could not tell. "I have been unforgivably rude to you, Mrs. Fletcher. I said terrible things, spread gossip, and generally made your life difficult. And I am sorry. What brought about this change of heart?" Clara looked away, her expression pained. "My nephew. The one I mentioned, the one with such fine prospects. He was married last month to a woman who makes him miserable. She is young and beautiful and from a good family, everything I told him he should want, and he is absolutely wretched. Last week, he came to me and said he wished he had followed his heart instead of listening to people like me." She turned back to Beatrice, and there were tears in her eyes. "I realize that I have been doing the same thing to you, telling you what you should want, who you should be, instead of celebrating that you found happiness. And the truth is, Mrs. Fletcher, I was jealous. I am 60 years old, and I have never known the kind of love I see between you and your husband. I lashed out because seeing your happiness reminded me of my own emptiness." Beatrice was stunned. Of all the things she had expected from Clara Henderson, vulnerability and genuine remorse had not been among them. "I appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Henderson. Will you forgive me? I know I do not deserve it, but I would like to at least try to make amends." Beatrice thought about holding onto her anger, about turning Clara away. But what would that accomplish? Life was too short for grudges, and she had learned that happiness shared was happiness multiplied. "I forgive you," she said. "And please call me Beatrice." Clara's relief was palpable. "Thank you. And perhaps, if you are willing, you might let me help prepare for the baby. I have no children of my own, but I have been sewing baby clothes for years, donating them to the church. I would be honored if you would accept some for your little one." It was a strange turn of events, but Beatrice found herself agreeing. Over the following weeks, Clara became a regular visitor to the ranch, arriving with gifts and advice and, surprisingly, genuine friendship. She and Beatrice would sit together on the porch, sewing and talking, and Beatrice discovered that, beneath the sharp tongue and social climbing, Clara was lonely and scared, just like everyone else. Beatrice went into labor on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after she had first met Wade in the mercantile. The irony of the timing was not lost on either of them. "Our anniversary present," Wade joked weakly as he helped her into the wagon for the ride to town. The doctor had insisted that, for a woman of her age having a baby, the birth should happen where he could properly attend her. The labor was long and difficult. Beatrice had forgotten, or perhaps had blocked out, how much it hurt, how exhausting the process was. Wade stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "I cannot do this," Beatrice gasped during a particularly intense contraction. "I am too old. I am not strong enough." "Yes, you are," Wade said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this, Beatrice. I believe in you." And somehow, with his belief to draw on, she found the strength to continue. As the sun was setting on that anniversary day, filling the room with golden light, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment they placed her son in her arms, all the pain and fear melted away. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn brown like his father's. Wade looked down at them both, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is beautiful," Wade whispered. "You are both so beautiful." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. Wade thought for a moment. "What about Thomas? After your first husband, he should be honored, Beatrice. He was part of making you who you are." The suggestion brought tears to her own eyes. "Thomas Fletcher, I like that." "And for a middle name, perhaps William, after your father." "Thomas William Fletcher," Wade said, trying it out. "Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." News of the birth spread quickly through town, and to Beatrice's surprise and delight, many people came to visit and offer congratulations. Even those who had been most critical seemed to soften in the face of new life. Clara Henderson was among the first visitors, bearing gifts and cooing over the baby with genuine affection. "He is perfect," Clara declared. "Just perfect. Oh, Beatrice, I am so happy for you." The first few months of Thomas's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Beatrice had never been happier. Wade was a devoted father, getting up with her for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at him. "I never thought I would have this," Wade confessed one night as they sat together watching Thomas sleep. "A wife, a child, a home. I thought I was meant to wander forever." "I never thought I would have it again," Beatrice replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," Wade agreed, pulling her close. "And I would not change a single thing." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Wade's reputation as a horse breeder spread across the West, and they could barely keep up with demand. They hired help, young men eager to learn the trade, and the small ranch grew into a thriving operation. The boarding house, under Mrs. Green's capable management, remained profitable. Beatrice maintained ownership but left the day-to-day operations to her manager, visiting town once a week to check on things and handle the finances. The arrangement worked perfectly, giving her income and independence while allowing her to focus on her family and the ranch. When Thomas was 2 years old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less shocking but no less joyful. At 45, she knew the risks were even greater than before, but she also had confidence born of experience. She had done this once. She could do it again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And when she went into labor on a warm spring evening, the process, while still painful, was quicker. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl just after midnight. "A daughter," Wade breathed, cradling the tiny bundle. "We have a daughter." They named her Sarah Rose Fletcher, Sarah after Wade's mother and Rose after Beatrice's mother. She had her mother's eyes and her father's smile, and from the moment she arrived, she had her older brother utterly captivated. Life settled into a rhythm then, the days full and busy but deeply satisfying. Beatrice would wake early to help Wade with the horses before the children rose. They would have breakfast as a family, then Wade would head out to work while Beatrice cared for Thomas and Sarah. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land and talk about the day. The town's attitude toward them had completed its transformation. What had once been scandalous was now seen as a love story, proof that it was never too late for happiness. Young couples would sometimes seek Wade and Beatrice out, asking for advice on marriage and building a life together. Beatrice always gave the same counsel: follow your heart, but do not be foolish about it. Love requires both passion and practicality to thrive. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Beatrice with a trip back to the mercantile where they had first met. They left the children with Mrs. Green, who had become like a grandmother to them, and rode into town together. "Why are we here?" Beatrice asked as they stood outside the shop. "Because this is where it all started," Wade said. 5 years ago, I walked into this store and saw the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on. And even though everyone said it was impossible, even though you had been told you were too old for love, I knew that age meant nothing when hearts are true." He pulled her close, right there on the street where anyone could see, and kissed her thoroughly. When they pulled apart, Beatrice was laughing. "You are incorrigible. I am in love. There is a difference." He took her hand and led her into the mercantile. Come on, let us go embarrass ourselves like we did on our first meeting." Inside, they wandered through the aisles, holding hands and sharing memories of that day. The shopkeeper, who remembered them, smiled indulgently. Other customers stopped to offer greetings and congratulations on their anniversary. It was a far cry from the judgment and disapproval they had once faced. As they were leaving, they ran into Clara Henderson. The older woman had become a dear friend over the years, a regular visitor to the ranch and a doting honorary aunt to Thomas and Sarah. "Celebrating, are you?" Clara asked with a warm smile. 5 years, Wade confirmed. 5 wonderful years, Clara said. "You know, I tell people all the time that you two are my inspiration, that if Beatrice Fletcher can find love at 42, then there is hope for all of us." "You could find love too, Clara," Beatrice said gently. "It is not too late," Clara laughed, but there was a wistfulness in it. "Perhaps, though I think my destiny is to live vicariously through you and Wade. And honestly, watching your happiness has brought more joy into my life than I could have imagined." They parted ways with promises to have Clara over for dinner soon, and Wade and Beatrice continued their walk through town. Nevada City had grown over the years, new buildings going up as more people moved to the area, but it still had the feel of a small town where everyone knew everyone. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked as they walked. "The struggle we went through, the judgment and gossip." Wade stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. Every bit of hardship was worth it to have this life with you. You made me believe in home, Beatrice. You made me believe in forever. You did the same for me. When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I was destined to be alone, to simply exist rather than live. And then you walked into that mercantile and looked at me like I was worth seeing. You are worth seeing, worth knowing, worth loving." He kissed her forehead gently. "Come on, let us go pick up our children and head home." Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. The years rolled on, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that made water scarce and winters that seemed endless. There were illnesses that had them sitting up all night with sick children, praying for fevers to break. There were business setbacks and difficult decisions. But through it all, Wade and Beatrice faced everything together. They had built not just a marriage but a true partnership, each supporting the other, each bringing their own strengths to whatever challenges arose. Their love, which had begun in such unlikely circumstances, only grew deeper and stronger with time. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who showed early promise with horses, already following his father around the ranch and learning everything he could. Sarah was her mother's daughter, practical and caring, with a fierce independence that both delighted and worried her parents. When Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 5, Beatrice made the decision to officially sell the boarding house to Mrs. Green. The older woman had run it so successfully, for so long, that it seemed only right for her to own it outright. The sale brought a substantial sum that Wade and Beatrice used to expand the ranch even further, purchasing adjacent land and building a larger barn. They also built a new house, a real house with multiple bedrooms and a spacious kitchen, and a parlor big enough for entertaining. It was a far cry from the tiny cabin where they had spent their first nights as husband and wife, but Beatrice insisted they keep the cabin, using it as a guest house. It held too many precious memories to tear down. On the day they moved into the new house, Wade carried Beatrice over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "We are too old for this foolishness," she said, though her arms were tight around his neck. "We will never be too old," Wade replied. "Remember, age means nothing when hearts are true." It had become their saying, the words they returned to whenever doubt crept in or challenges seemed overwhelming. Age means nothing when hearts are true. It was the foundation on which they had built their entire life together. As the children grew older, Wade and Beatrice found themselves taking on a sort of mentorship role in the community. Young couples facing opposition from their families would come seeking advice. Widows wondering if it was appropriate to remarry would ask for Beatrice's counsel. Wade spoke regularly at church about the importance of following one's heart while still honoring one's responsibilities. They had become, despite or perhaps because of their rocky beginning, pillars of the community. The scandal that had once surrounded them had transformed into a beloved local legend. The story of the widow and the cowboy who proved that love has no expiration date. On their 10th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration in the square, the same square where they had danced together that first time at the autumn festival. Nearly the entire town turned out, and as Beatrice looked around at all the smiling faces, she could hardly believe this was the same place that had once shunned her for daring to fall in love. Speech. Someone called out, and soon the whole crowd was chanting for Wade and Beatrice to say something. Wade stood, pulling Beatrice up with him. 10 years ago, I walked into a mercantile and saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I was told she was a widow, that she was too old for romance, that I should look elsewhere. But I did not listen, because from the moment our eyes met, I knew that age meant nothing when hearts are true. He turned to Beatrice, taking both her hands in his. You have given me everything, Beatrice. A home, a family, a purpose. You took a wandering cowboy and gave him roots, and I promise you, for as long as I draw breath, I will spend every day proving that loving you was the best decision I ever made. There was not a dry eye in the square, Beatrice's own included. She stepped forward and kissed her husband to thunderous applause. When the cheering died down, it was Beatrice's turn to speak. I was told I was too old for love. I was told that my time had passed, that I should accept my lot and live out my days alone, and I almost believed it. I almost convinced myself that the part of me that yearned for connection and romance was foolish and inappropriate. She looked out at the crowd, at faces young and old, at couples and families and individuals. But Wade taught me that it is never too late to open your heart, never too late to take a chance, never too late to believe in happiness. We may have taken an unconventional path, but it was our path, and I would not change a single step of it. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and food. Thomas and Sarah danced with their parents, and at one point, Clara Henderson took to the floor with a visiting merchant who had been sweet on her for months. Beatrice caught Clara's eye and smiled, silently encouraging her friend to take her own chance at happiness. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Wade and Beatrice stood together at the edge of the square, watching their children play with other young ones in the fading light. You think they will remember this? Beatrice asked, meaning the celebration, the love, the sense of community. I think they will remember that their parents loved each other deeply and were not afraid to show it, Wade replied. And hopefully, that will give them the courage to follow their own hearts when the time comes. They walked home together under a canopy of stars, their children between them, a family complete and content. The road had not always been easy, but it had led them here, to this moment, to this life they had built from determination and love and unwavering belief in each other. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Wade's hair turned gray and his joints grew stiff. Sarah proved to have a head for business, managing the ranch's finances and negotiating contracts with buyers. Both children married in their 20s, bringing new family members into the fold. Thomas married a local girl named Emma, and they built a house on the ranch property, staying to help run the business. Sarah married a man named Robert from Sacramento, but they too chose to settle nearby, unable to imagine leaving the place and the people they loved. Before long, there were grandchildren, and the ranch that had once been just Wade and Beatrice echoed with young voices and laughter. Wade would sit on the porch with babies on his lap, telling them stories of the old days, while Beatrice taught the older grandchildren to cook and sew and tend a garden. On their 20th anniversary, Wade planned something special. He had their old cabin cleaned and prepared, filled it with flowers and candles, and surprised Beatrice by suggesting they spend the night there, just the two of them. Like a second honeymoon, he said, his eyes twinkling. Except we do not have to pretend we are young anymore. They lay in bed that night, the same bed where they had spent their wedding night so many years ago, and talked about all that had happened since. 2 children, multiple grandchildren, a thriving business, a community that had gone from hostile to embracing. It seemed impossible that all of it had sprung from a chance meeting in a mercantile. "You remember what that woman said to you?" Wade asked. "Clara, in the shop that first day, something about you being too old. She told me I had to face facts, that no man wanted a woman my age. That I had my chance at love and needed to accept my lot." Beatrice smiled in the darkness. Poor Clara, she was so certain she was right. She was trying to protect you in her own misguided way, trying to save you from disappointment. Instead, she nearly talked me out of the best thing that ever happened to me. Beatrice rolled over to face him, even though she could barely see him in the darkness. "Wade Fletcher, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children and this life we built, all of it. Even the hard parts, the judgment and the gossip, especially the hard parts, they made us stronger. They proved that what we had was real and worth fighting for." She reached out, finding his hand and lacing her fingers through his. "I love you. I have loved you since that first moment in the mercantile, even though I was too scared to admit it. I love you too. Always have, always will." They fell asleep like that, hands linked, hearts entwined, 2 people who had defied expectation and convention to find their happy ending. Wade lived to the age of 70, still working with horses until his final days, though at a much slower pace. When his heart finally gave out one autumn morning, he was in the barn with his son and grandson, teaching them a technique for calming skittish horses. He simply sat down, said he needed to rest a moment, and quietly slipped away. Beatrice grieved, of course. The loss of Wade left a hole in her heart that nothing could fill, but she did not have to face it alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, and the community that had once judged her now supported her through her loss. At Wade's funeral, the church was packed. Beatrice sat in the front row, flanked by Thomas and Sarah, and listened as person after person stood to share stories of Wade's kindness, his skill, his generosity. The wandering cowboy who had once been viewed with suspicion had become one of the most beloved figures in Nevada City. When it was her turn to speak, Beatrice rose and walked to the pulpit. She was 72 years old, her hair white and her hands marked with age spots, but her voice was steady and strong. "My husband once told me that age means nothing when hearts are true," she began. "He proved that to me every day of our 30 years together. Wade loved deeply and completely, not just me, but everyone he met. He saw potential where others saw only problems. He believed in second chances and new beginnings." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "When I met Wade, I had convinced myself that my life was over, that I was too old for love or happiness or dreams. He showed me I was wrong, and in doing so, he did not just change my life. He changed this whole community. He taught us all that it is never too late, that love has no age limit, that hearts can heal and bloom at any stage of life. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we spent together. He gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. He saw me for who I truly was and loved me anyway. And I hope that each of you will honor his memory by being brave enough to do the same, by opening your hearts and taking chances and believing that love is always worth the risk. The funeral was followed by a wake at the ranch, with food and drink and stories that gradually shifted from sorrowful to celebratory. Beatrice found herself surrounded by people sharing memories, laughing through tears, remembering Wade not with grief but with joy. Clara Henderson, now in her 80s and frail, pulled Beatrice aside. "I am so sorry, dear. He was a good man, the best. And you too, you proved me wrong about everything. I am grateful you did not listen to me all those years ago." "I am grateful too," Beatrice said, embracing her old friend. "And Clara, you were not wrong about everything. You were right that life can be hard and that hearts can be broken. You just did not account for the fact that sometimes the risk is worth it." Beatrice lived another 15 years after Wade's death, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. By then, the ranch had expanded to include not just her children and grandchildren but great-grandchildren as well. The Fletcher name had become synonymous with quality horses and fair dealing throughout California. When they laid her to rest beside Wade, under a large oak tree on the ranch property, it seemed like the whole county turned out. The pastor told the story of the widow and the cowboy, of how they had defied convention and built a love story for the ages. He spoke of courage and determination, and the power of two true hearts finding each other. Thomas, now in his 50s with gray threading through his hair, stood and shared his own memories. "My parents taught me that love is not about age or circumstance or what other people think. It is about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and choosing them every day. They showed me that a life built on love will weather any storm." Sarah spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "My mother used to tell me that she had been dead inside when she met my father, that he brought her back to life and taught her to hope again. I think that is what true love does. It resurrects the parts of us that have died. It gives us permission to be fully alive." As the sun set on Beatrice Fletcher's funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house for dinner, as the family had done countless times before. Stories were shared, laughter mixed with tears, and life went on as it always does. The cabin where Wade and Beatrice had started their marriage was preserved, turned into a sort of family shrine. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sometimes sleep there, feeling connected to the love story that had made their family possible. The ring Wade had given Beatrice, his grandmother's ring with the small sapphire, was passed down through the generations, given to each Fletcher bride on her wedding day along with the story of the widow and the cowboy. In time, the story became legend, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the core truth remained that once upon a time in Nevada City, California, a widow was told she was too old for love. And a cowboy looked her in the eyes and said that age means nothing when hearts are true. Together, they proved it, not just for themselves but for everyone who came after, everyone who doubted, everyone who feared it was too late. Their legacy lived on in the ranch, in their descendants, in the countless people whose lives they had touched. But more than that, it lived on in the belief that love is always possible, that new beginnings can happen at any age, and that the bravest thing anyone can do is open their heart and take a chance on happiness. no matter what anyone else says. The story of Wade and Beatrice Fletcher became a touchstone for the community, a reminder that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, when we are brave enough to defy convention and follow our hearts. It was a story about second chances, about courage, and about the transformative power of love that sees beyond surface to soul. And it all started with a chance meeting in a mercantile, a widow who thought her time had passed, and a cowboy who knew better. From that single moment, a lifetime of love and happiness grew, proving once and for all that when it comes to matters of the heart, age truly means nothing. What matters is truth, courage, and the willingness to believe that you deserve love, no matter what anyone says, no matter how old you are, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. In the end, Wade and Beatrice's story was not about defying age or convention. It was about two people who found each other and refused to let anything, not judgment, not gossip, not doubt, keep them apart. It was about building a life and a legacy on the foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and unshakable love. It was about proving that the human heart has no expiration date, that love can bloom in any season of life, and that the only opinion that truly matters is the one held by the person who knows you best. Years after both Wade and Beatrice had passed, when their great-grandchildren would ask about them, the family would gather and tell the story. They would speak of courage and determination, of a love that refused to be denied, of two people who looked at each other and saw not age or circumstances, but simply the possibility of happiness. And always, the story would end the same way, with the words that had become the Fletcher family motto, the words that Wade had first spoken to Beatrice, and that she had carried with her every day of their life together. Age means nothing when hearts are true. Those words, simple but profound, captured everything Wade and Beatrice had believed and lived. They were words that gave hope to the lonely, courage to the fearful, and permission to anyone who thought their chance had passed. They were a legacy more valuable than the land or the horses, or the material wealth the family had accumulated. They were a reminder that the best things in life, the most important things, are not determined by calendars or social expectations, but by the willingness to open your heart and believe in the impossible. And so the Fletcher Ranch continued to thrive, generation after generation, built on a foundation of love that had started with a widow who dared to hope and a cowboy who dared to love her. Their story became part of the land itself, whispered by the wind that blew through the grasslands, reflected in the creek that ran through the property, present in every sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. In Nevada City, California, where it all began, a plaque was eventually erected in the town square, commemorating Wade and Beatrice Fletcher and their contribution to the community. But more than any monument or memorial, their real legacy lived in the hearts of those who heard their story and found the courage to write their own. Every person who chose love over fear, every person who refused to believe it was too late, every person who opened their heart despite the risk, they were all carrying forward what Wade and Beatrice had started, the widow and the cowboy. Two unlikely people who found each other in an unlikely place and built an unlikely love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. They proved that fairy tales are not just for the young, that happy endings can come at any age, and that when two hearts recognize each other, nothing else matters. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived and a love well loved. From that first moment in the mercantile to that final moment when Beatrice closed her eyes for the last time, Wade's name on her lips, their story was one of joy and challenge, passion and partnership, individual growth and shared dreams. It was a story that began with someone saying no and ended with a resounding yes. A yes to love, a yes to life, a yes to the beautiful mess of opening your heart and letting someone in. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Wade and Beatrice were together again. Two hearts reunited, two souls intertwined, proving one final time that love, true love, transcends everything, even death itself. Their story had reached its happy ending, not because it was easy or perfect, but because they had faced every challenge together and come out stronger on the other side. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for, to love and be loved in return, to build something meaningful with our time on earth, and to leave behind a legacy that inspires others to be brave. Wade and Beatrice Fletcher did all that and more. They proved that it is never too late, that hearts have no expiration date, and that age truly means nothing when hearts are true. Their story was done, complete and perfect in its way, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and challenge assumptions. From widow to wife, from wanderer to husband, from strangers to soulmates, they had traveled the full journey together. And in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both, a love story for the ages, a reminder that the bravest thing any of us can do is believe in love, no matter what the world says, no matter how impossible it seems. Age means nothing when hearts are true. Wade said it first, but Wade and Beatrice proved it together, every single day of their 30 years of marriage and beyond. And that truth, that simple but profound truth, became their gift to the world, a gift that kept giving long after they were gone, inspiring countless others to take their own chances on love. The story of the widow and the cowboy was complete, their happy ending assured, their legacy secure. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What better way to spend a life than in the arms of someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves you anyway? In the Fletcher family, in Nevada City, in the hearts of everyone who heard their story, Wade and Beatrice lived on, eternal reminders that love conquers all, that courage pays dividends, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for, no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Their story had reached its end, but its impact would never fade, a bright light in the darkness, a beacon of hope for anyone who dared to believe in second chances and happy endings. And so we leave them there, Wade and Beatrice Fletcher, together forever, their love story complete, their happy ending assured, proof positive that when hearts are true, nothing else matters, not age, not circumstance, not the opinions of others. They found each other, they chose each other, and they built a beautiful life together. What more could any love story ask for? The end had come, but it was a good end, a happy end, the kind of ending every love story deserves. The widow had found love again. The cowboy had found home. Together, they had found everything. Their story was complete.